Okay, I'd like to introduce our next speaker of the evening, Frances Lord. She is a curator and arts consultant who specialises in developing and managing public art and commissioning projects. Recent projects include Spiralling Skywards for Nyman's National Trust property in West Sussex and Combe Down Public Art Project in 2009. Published materials include Transformation and Change, The Stabilisation of Combe Down Village, The Saving of the Village 2010, and Artist Profiles 2008. Frances is going to speak to us tonight predominantly about the Four Shores project, which was artworks for the Isle of Sheppey in 2005, commissioned by the Medway and Swell Estuary project. Comprised of a sequence of walks and commissioned artworks, sculpture, text, installation, film, and a book on poetry on the Isle of Sheppey, linking Sheerness, Warden Point, Laysdown and Harty. The creative team was led by the artist Stephen Turner, the poet Ross Barber, architect Simon Barker, filmmaker Abe Fletcher, and project manager Frances Lord. Please give a warm welcome to Frances Lord.
Rachel, it's good to be here. Well, no need for me to do the introduction to the project, because Rachel's already given that. Four Shores for artworks for the Isle of Sheppey was a 2005 project. I'm going to tell you a bit about the process, the commissioning process, the artworks that the artists made, and some of the ideas that the artists had, which were not actually realised in physical form. And I also wanted to read 4 very short poems by Ross Barber, which illustrate the 4 different walks on the island. Stephen Turner invited me to be part of this project in 2005 to come on board as the project manager, and at that time there was Stephen, and he also wanted to work with the architect Simon Barker to bring another discipline into the project. And he also was very keen to work with Abe Fletcher, a young filmmaker who'd recently graduated from the Royal College of Art. And so we were missing the writer or the poet. So together we brought Ross Barber on board. And it's a very strong creative team. And so part of my role was to organise events on the island, whether it was deluxe accommodation, like staying in the caravan park. That was one of my roles. Well, we had quite a sort of modest budget, and had to make it stretch a long way to enable the artworks to be realised in full. And we organised a number of events, for example, walk and talk events around the island. And we also organised an event where about 60 people came to one of the main education college on the island. And the purpose of these get-togethers and walks and talks was really twofold, I suppose, to inform people of Sheppey about the project, but also very much for the creative team to learn from the inhabitants and the residents of the island, the people who knew the place really, really well. So, next slide, please. So these are just a very few contextual images. They're probably looking very familiar, aren't they? Grey, wet, much like the summer at the moment. And so the artist spent a week on the island, and really this was a week of exploration, getting to know the place. And do any of you know the Isle of Sheppey? I know Jamanda does. few nods. And it is actually a really extraordinary place. It's a place of real contrasts. There's 36 inhabitants on Sheppey and 36,000 inhabitants on the whole island, and 11,000 of those live on the main town, Sheerness. And It's a place of really stark beauty, and they're very beautiful shell beaches, they're intertidal salt marshes, they're mud flats, there's a huge amount of erosion, there's grazing marshland, and huge bird colonies. So it's really varied. And as the artist observed, there's also a huge amount of concrete on the island, and that observation led to the creation of several artworks. Have the next slide. Thank you. This is Shellness Beach. So, the next one, please. Thank you very much. So, actually, I just wanted to read a short poem by Ros. So, the project Foreshores Artworks for the Isle of Sheppey, as Rachel's explained, there are 4 different walks which take you eastwards around the island, and each of these areas has a very different sort of character to them. And Ros Barber, she wrote this marvellous set of collection of poems, all in rhyming couplets, and it's based on the folklore and Sheppey sayings, and so it's a real mix of what may be real facts and what may be completely, fictitious sets of information. And there's a Sheppey saying, which is, the Isle of Sheppey isn't the end of the world, but you can see it from here. This was much quoted, as you can imagine, as we went our way around the island. And actually, before I read Ros's poem, just wanted to read you a short statement that Stephen wrote about the artist's experience of being on the island. So he wrote, "The 4 of us camped on the island, spending time together, discussing ideas from very different perspectives, made for an intensely creative process. Between us, we amassed a wide range of material, which really stimulated our imaginations. We were helped by the many knowledgeable people we met, a wasp fancier, local publicans, a retired bobby, the many fossil collectors who walk the beach around Warden Point, as well as the mums at Muswell Manor, where we stayed, and who shared their knowledge and enthusiasm for the early history of flight around their property. Sheppey has a very rich maritime history, and as I've already mentioned, geology, geography, incredibly diverse, as with flora and fauna. So there's much source material to work on. And so I just wanted to read the first poem, which of course now lost the place for, found it, called The Big Bang. And one of the things that fascinated us all when we were in Sheerness was that you could look out from Sheerness Promenade into the sea, and in the sea, the masts of the sunken US Liberty ship, the SS Richard Montgomery, which was sunk in 1941, they're visible from Sheerness seafront. And legend has it, and I believe it is reality too actually, the hold contains tons of potentially unstable high explosive. So all the artists, most particular Ros, were fascinated by this, close proximity with, a huge bomb essentially, and what if it might go off at any time? Though of course it wouldn't, because it was underwater. Anyway, she wrote a short poem called The Big Bang. Enough to break the windows in Chatham, enough to make East London rattle, enough for Rochester's spire to crumble, and every inch of Kent to rumble. Beneath those 3 little crosses you see, a broken back ship full of TNT, enough to sink Sheppey into the sea, enough to chop up the ships within reach, and rain their shrapnel on Southend Beach, enough to turn you into teeth. So, okay, so the area around Warden Point and Minster was an absolutely fascinating area. We're going into the sort of second walk now, and suffered a huge amount of erosion. So you see evidence on the beaches of basically buildings that are just completely disintegrated. You see whole walls. It wasn't just individual bricks, whole walls. Next image. And they were just there amongst all the shells and the pebbles and the mud. Next slide. Thank you. And the picture there is of Simon Barker and Abby Lee Fletcher in the background, and what we think is the remains of one of the pillboxes that Stephen talked about earlier. And it's just extraordinary, these major collapses into the beach. And I'll just read another short poem of Rosie's which illustrates this. It's called Car Park Kisses. Minster, the car park's concrete kisses, full of mud and mayweed. This is the place to see the sea from. Take a stroll along the long prom to the distant boom of the firing range. Southend glinting like a knife blade, where daylight nicks itself on the edge of Essex. In 1789, a sheet of ice stretched and joined the counties hip to hip, arthritically. You could have limped it. Now the link is liquid and twice the distance. For Sheppey's vice is constant shifting off the cliff face, itching to vanish, keen to be different. Minster, once at the island's heart, has a beach, so this is the start of the end of it, and the car park writes its kisses. Goodbye, goodbye. Next image, please. So this is one of the pillboxes which we went inside, and because it sort of sloped so diagonally into the beach, it was a really disconcerting experience going into it, because the ground was just completely diagonal, so you felt literally as if you were at sea. So next image, please. And Stephen made several artworks for locations around the island, and we had many discussions about what the nature of these artworks were to be. I mean, of course, it wasn't my job to come up with ideas, but that's the job of the artist. But all the artists felt very strongly that the work should be low key, that people should happen across it as they walked on the island. It shouldn't be hugely signposted, that the artworks would just gently fade into the sea, into the land over a period of time. And this was the philosophy that permeated the project throughout the 2 years duration of the project. And so this is one of 4 pieces? 6 pieces, right? 6 pieces, if you wouldn't mind going back closer, to Fallen. And Stephen worked with a letter cutter on this particular series of works, and there were words that were taken from Ros Barber's poems, Fallen, Exposed, I can't remember these, Worn. Anyway, there are three of them, and they're very, very beautiful pieces of work, so just literally letter cut into these fragments of buildings that remain along the beach in Minster, Warden Point. Yes, with highly polished surfaces. So they're very beautiful art objects. Next slide, please. Yes, so we get now to Shell Ness and the hearty end of the island, and this part of the island is just extraordinarily beautiful, actually, with these beaches that are literally composed from shells. And I told you about the prevalence of concrete in the island, and Stephen had the idea of mixing white concrete with shells from the beach. And so he experimented with different types of shells, razor clams, oyster shells. And remember, it was quite a long process of experimentation in his studio to actually get the mix right and for the shells to be small enough for the edges of the artworks to be polished down. And anyway, when they were finished, again, they're just very beautiful items that objects that you can find as you walk around that area of the island. So. Yeah, if you could show the next slide, please. Thanks. So some were circular and some were more of a sort of oval. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so again, I just want to read a very short poem by Ros, which really evokes the shell experience. It's called Beach Houses. Rocks turn to sand, homes become shacks, erosion works its teeth along Sheppy's back, and things are broken down to their tiniest parts, like the granules of mountains in an hourglass, rubbing themselves through the narrow neck until there's nothing left of them for time to kill. Underfoot, the music of shells, the wash of the sea, repeats, be still. Anyway, jumping back to Sheerness, one of our main commission pieces was a collaboration between Ros the poet and Simon the architect. And Ros wrote two poems that are additional to this publication, and she entitled them the piece "The End of the World," which of course relates to the Sheppy quote. And there's a lot of experimentation that went on in terms of how to adhere this poem to the risers and the treads of the steps at Sheerness, and in the end the paint that's used on road surfaces was used. And so you can read the poem from, whether you're looking down into the sea or looking up towards the town. And I went to Sheppy just over a year ago, and the artwork is still there, and it looks exactly the same. There's a small amount of erosion of the paint. And actually I thought, I think, we plan to apply for planning permission for just 2 years, I think, to the Environment Agency, the planning permission and applying for, permission to do these artworks was quite complicated, but I was absolutely delighted to see 7 years later, that these words were as pristine as they ever were. So this is an image taken during our launch. We had a launch in September where we organised another walk and talk around the island, and which went really well. And actually, I think it was during August when Stephen was working on the Steeforts project. So, the Foreshores project had been sort of cantering on, and then Stephen suddenly announced that he was going to be in a sea fort for 6 weeks. And this coincided with when we were putting all the publications together. Anyway, it all happened in his absence, and he came back and we had the launch in September. So, next image, please. That's Simon Barker, the architect. And so it's really interesting bringing together this creative team, because there's great creative synergy between the four of them, and much to learn from each other's disciplines. And there's a debate about, whether individual works would be creative or whether collaborative works would be created. And actually, it was quite organic. So some works were individual and some were collaborative. And Simon Barker came up with an idea for a sculptural piece made, I think I'm right in saying, from stainless steel, that would evoke the history of flight on the island. Although we did get planning permission for that piece, we had insufficient budget to realise that particular commission. But it is documented in this catalogue here. Okay, next image, please. Thank you. So this is razor bench, which is also made from concrete and shells, and it's very beautifully smooth and a lovely object to sit on, and that's still there too. So years later. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. And I'll just read one last poem, which is called Bird Reserve. A green backbone to walk on, the counter wall divides brackish from fresh, marshland from estuarine. Two habitats collide in the grass fault line. On the seaward side, straw-coloured reeds fan the salt marsh, cool all the way to the estuary and the river beyond. Inland, the reeds are blonde, the flooded grass clotted with geese, teal, widgeon and game birds, landing and taking off as if they need practice. When they take off in squadrons, the geese shouting, oi oi, oh, I can't do this, the geese shouting, the gulls squabbling, the game birds whirring like clockwork toys, a pheasant croaks with its unoiled voice, and another clap of birds stagger the air, wings knocking the light out of its sockets, their flash like the blades of the tin windmill, whose tines cut the sun into brilliant, fierce slices. And next image, please. Thanks. And I'll finish with a still image from Abby Lee Fletcher's film. And Abby's brief was to make a documentary about the island, and she actually interviewed all of the artists, and so the DVD is sort of fascinating in that sense, and there's some really beautiful images which evoke the spirit of the place, the Isle of Sheppey. Okay. Thank you.
That was really fascinating. I'm sure you all agree. I'm sure there's many people in the room, like me, who kind of looked across to the Isle of Sheppey and the Isle of Grain all their lives, but never actually been there. And that's really made me want to go. And our next speaker tonight is a local photographer, Simon Fowler, who's recently shown his phenomenal images of the estuary in the Lee Art Trail. And again, I think his eye is very much, like many of us, looking across to the kind of beauty of the chimneys and the estuary. So without further ado, please welcome Simon Fowler.
I suppose it started when I kind of had a bit of an upset in my life. A couple of years back, I left my partner and my kids and went on a journey which I didn't have any preconceived idea of going on. Picked up a camera, started doing a few shots, and slowly, with lots of encouragement from lots of really special people, suddenly decided that I wanted to do something like this. Oh, sorry. You hear me at the back? Next slide. So I started taking these shots of the estuary, and I got a little bit addicted, I must say, to the chimney, which is on the Isle of Grain. And there's also another chimney to the right of it, which also has a part to play in it. And to this day, I still don't know whether it's on the Isle of Grain or whether it's not. I think it is, but it is a secondary chimney. And, oh, that's better, isn't it? just discovered sound. And so I started doing these images, which are, this one is from my balcony actually. I'm very privileged to have a flat that overlooks the estuary, and I can monitor the weather and all the weather conditions that are happening on the estuary on a daily basis. So I can then program myself to go and find a spot and take pictures. But some of the best ones have come from this balcony. and it's incredible. I see things that I never dreamed I would see on the estuary in the time that I've been there. But I tend to like it when the tide's going out or it's coming in. I love the mud flats. I love the way the Isle of Grain just has this almost, I've got a word now, opulent. Oh, thank you. Feel to it in certain weather conditions. So, as you can see, this one, if you go to the next one, you get these strange anomalies happening with the weather on the estuary. They say that the estuary, or this part of the estuary, has got big skies, and I don't think they're wrong. I think, like I say, I'm very lucky that I can monitor this very close. A bit like when you're on those towers, you see it on a day-to-day basis. You can program yourself into understanding what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. You can start seeing the weather fronts coming across, and it allows you to be able to judge whether you are going to get a shot. And photography really is a case of right place, right time, in most cases, if you're going to do this kind of photography. And there you see, every now and then, this is in February, and what happens is they release all the gases and stuff, which when it's very cold, by the look of it, creates these enormous funnels of steam that come up and just go. But what made this really interesting was, I watched it coming. This is very early. There was absolutely no wind. And I think this is the only time I've seen it absolutely like this, where it's absolutely almost like a mirror. Next one. And you see that you can do some bizarre things with photography. I mean, that wave is only about 10 inches high, but I had a very wet head, and a very sick camera after. But the actual angles you can get from photography, I just think are amazing. It's that little bit of effort, and you can really get in. And I think you can capture these things, which is pretty difficult to capture maybe in any other way, really. So next one. I spent a lot of time on Estuary Island around there, walking along. Well, I have done quite recently. And again, the same sort of thing. I've focused on this chimney in this particular project, and the way it kind of has this iconic feel. And there is a rumour that it's going. It doesn't meet UN sanctions or disciplines or whatever they want to call it, and apparently it's coming down. So this would be a fairly nice record. And of course we're going to have an airport in front of it, so... No, we're not. Okay. But anyway, there's a lot of things going on, so it will probably be perfect for the next project, but anyway, not yet. And so I've spent most of my time in this particular project focusing on this. As you can see, the different moods that you get from the chimney and from the estuary especially are just cosmic. I just, can't believe sometimes what I see. Next one. This one actually is quite interesting. Again, it's trickery really. There's loads of pools that go along the seafront in Southend, which are just collect the water, and I think they were Victorian swimming pools. And basically they stay full. There is actually no water in the estuary other than the channel. But this, again, with the trickery of being very low and getting very wet, it makes it look like it's going out to the actual chimney again. Again, a few more. These are just really showing you the incredible skies at different times that you get. This again is very early. The early skies, I feel, are the better skies. They just seem to have a little bit more of a crispness and a bit more of a dramatic feel. And of course the landscape season's a little bit up, although we're having a bit of a reprieve with the weather, but generally in the summer we tend to get just blue skies, and it takes away a little bit of that interest. Next one. Again, playing very low on the ground again. They're tiny. You don't really get many big waves in the estuary because it rolls from one side to the other. It doesn't get a chance to get that big. The first picture is quite rare. It was a southerly wind coming across. It was pushing them in a perfect straight line, and so they were rolling in a straight line towards me. But they tend to go at diagonals either way, and it's tidal, so the wind changes when the tide's going out and when it's coming in. So you get this tide, there's wind that comes with the tide, and then there's wind that goes with it out, which is quite normal. Yes. again, you get these things where I always think I'm meeting God on some occasions. I honestly do. I think the time's up, he's come. And he's on his way over, and maybe I'm being drawn to the balcony and I'm just going to chuck myself off. But they're just almost kind of biblical, some of the images that you can get. You know, and I've seen, there are many photographers that I've got to know who have also caught these absolutely amazing kind of moments. I mean, you get moments, they're up there, and all of a sudden gone. It can happen that fast. And that's it.
Stunning, Simon, absolutely stunning. What a reminder of how incredibly beautiful the place where we live is. I really enjoyed seeing those, thank you. Now we're going to hear very briefly, last speaker of the night, from Ben Eastop, who's going to talk about the Estuary project, which I was really privileged to be a part of last year. Ben lives on a 80-foot Dutch barge, and it was his idea and the idea of another artist called Simon Callery to bring together a group of kind of creative practitioners and take this experiential trip down the Thames Estuary for 5 days on Ben's barge. So I was there as a writer, there was a filmmaker, artists, an archaeologist, and it was just a kind of phenomenal experience. If some of you saw the film that was on as you walked in, that tells you a little bit more about it. But anyway, I'm going to pass you over to Ben now, who's going to talk about the Estuary project.
Yeah, so if we can start the slide sequence. I'm not going to talk to each of the slides, and as Rachel says, this is... Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. This is really just a kind of introduction to the Estuary project. We just called it Estuary, which we did last year, and we hope will lead into a discussion and invite you to ask questions and make comments and so on, not just about this project but about all the speakers you've heard tonight. Strictly speaking, the project was an initiative of Simon Callery. He's an artist based in East London, a painter, and who has been doing, or had been doing work with English Heritage and working with a team of archaeologists at the Shellhaven site, which many of you know is going to be one of a huge container port just up the river there. And his work is really with an interest in landscape, and he knew that I had this Dutch barge which I live on and work on, and approached me with the idea of using the barge to create this journey virtually from the non-tidal Thames in the centre of the City of London down to the estuary, where we thought there was a kind of nominal end of the estuary, which we discussed many times about where that might be. As it happened, we didn't quite get there because we had lots of engine troubles on the way, so it was quite a traumatic trip as well as a memorable one. So we, as Rachel says, we had a team of 7 of us across different disciplines. Rachel, writer, James Price, who made the film with Rachel, filmmaker over there, my son Luke, who's a graphic designer over there, John Ecott, who's a composer, I think he's here still somewhere, there he is, and Sephrin Penrose, who's an archaeologist of the recent past. And I should say some of these photographs you can see now are some of her pictures as well as other people in the team. But Simon Callery, having done this work on the land, trying to understand the archaeological history of this particular part of the shore, really wanted to do something which was about an experience of the estuary from the water. So, and we wanted to do something very slow, contemplative, and a shared experience, which is what it turned out to be. We spent, I think, 4 days altogether living in this barge, slowly, very slowly I should say, travelling down the estuary to, first of all to Queenborough, which you've heard all about, and then across to Southend, and spent a very, a memorable, and for Rachel anyway, somewhat frightening night when a gale blew up while we were moored underneath Southend Pier. Yeah, it was quite an experience. So these images really just recall some of that experience. I'm not going to say much more than that really. The film, I think if there's time, we're going to show the film again this evening, and also should add that we're here, what we're calling a mini residency. Although Simon unfortunately can't be here, he's doing some work down in Dorset, and Sefrin also can't be here, is engaged in other things, but the rest of us are here to talk about how we might develop the project and what, how it might be taken forward. So I'm going to leave it there, but really to hand back to Rachel and to open it up to questions and comments and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to open up to the audience soon, but I think tonight we've had such a rich array of presentations about the kind of unique landscape of the estuary, and it couldn't be more timely. There's Boris Johnson and many others planning this horrid airport, which is going to ruin much of our natural and beautiful landscape if it goes ahead. And I'd just like to ask our speakers tonight maybe what they feel about that, or what they feel is really should be protected about the estuary. I mean, maybe we can start with you, Stephen. That microphone's working. Why do you think it's important this doesn't happen?
I'm not convinced we need any more airports anyway. It's not a particularly great way to travel. And I even considered offering to come here virtually tonight, because you can actually have quite convincing discussions and meetings online, and people don't necessarily have to go places to share their views. So that's one thing. On the marshes it would be a tragedy. It would also be completely unworkable for different reasons. You'd have to physically kill about 300 pairs of overwintering wading birds, 300,000, more birds than people. If you didn't, and you tried to land aircraft, you kill the birds everywhere, but you bring down aircraft, because you can never separate aircraft from birds. It's absolutely nonsense. It's an internationally protected wilderness. It's the only one in South East England, and it's important in the whole world. It's a Ramsar site, triple SI. And I think that there was another reason, but I can't remember what it was, because I'm thinking, but maybe someone else will remember it.
That's great. Gina, did you have any further thoughts on this?
There's not much I can say further to what we all know already. It would just ruin it for all of us, wouldn't it? I wouldn't want to come here anymore. Today, when I arrived here from London, I was quite stressed, and I just was able to sit here out in the park at Shoe Lane for good half hour. It was absolutely lovely. The silence, I was so grateful for it. Just listening to the trees here, and yeah, to lose that, none of us would want to be here anymore, would we?
Actually, could I come back? Because my memory started to work again. I forgot the reason. There's something that geographers recognise and scientists recognise in general called coastal squeeze. And as we encroach on the estuaries and build up the sides of the rivers, and we would really have to build and create an artificial island for a runway for this airport, the water has to go somewhere. And what's going to happen is it will flood huge urban areas. Most of the building in South East along the estuaries in the floodplain 80% of Sheerness, which we've been talking about, is under water, under sea level. And so it creates just insurmountable problems, even if they go ahead and do what they also want to do and build a replacement for the Thames barrier across from Grain to Essex, which would be a phenomenal engineering work and sort of unnecessary if we don't have the airport.
Thank you. Is there anyone here with a kind of counter argument for the airport? No. Is there anyone who's got any questions that they'd like to ask for any of our panel here tonight? Yes.
Simon, you very eloquently captured the lights and the changing lights at Lee. But have you considered stretching out towards Shoebury, particularly early in the morning, and catching some of the, the sunrises there? I think are even more spectacular than the sunsets that we have this evening.
Oh, I have done, yeah. Oh, I do, yeah. I mean, what I showed tonight was just a specific project. A lot of it was about my balcony. I have a strange love affair with it.
Sure.
It's only about 2 foot wide by 4 foot long, and I fall off it, I'm dead. So it's kind of that. And also it was just really, I wanted to share what I had from there. I mean, there's a lot of people that live on the seafront. I'm sure they would see similar, if not the same things that I see. But I've only just started seeing it. I mean, I lived on a flat where I had that before, and didn't look. I didn't really look. I really look now. Sure. And I think that's the difference, and I think that's what comes out in the photograph. Sure. But I do go along each way to get feedback. I always wanted it. Yeah. At the end of the day, I think that's it. Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah.
Any other questions at all? Comments? I've got a question I'm dying to ask Stephen, I must say. We really made us all kind of think in different ways. I think the images that you showed from the seafloors. I'm just so curious why none of them were looking out onto the estuary. Why did you feel the need to look in so much in that space?
I'm remembering back quite a while now, but I think it's because a number of reasons really. Looking out, it seemed too expansive and made me want to connect with what was there, almost to leave. So by looking inward and trying to find excitement and knowledge and connection with the place, I had to look at the walls inside and cut off the outside. And I think it's like being in prison must be like. If you don't want to see visitors, if you're in prison for 20 years, you might not necessarily want to see anyone, because it just reminds you of being out, and what you've got to deal with is being inside the cell or the jail or whatever it is. And so there's an element of the Seafort that was like a very beautiful prison, and I had to deal with interiors and not think about the outside at all, and it was the way of coping with being there for 5.5 weeks and enjoying it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I was also wondering about the fact that you were blogging there. I was wondering about the fact that I was wondering about the fact that you were blogging from there, and I was wondering if you ever had the temptation just to surf the internet all day.
I might have had the temptation, but I didn't have the ability because we arranged it so that I had no access to it. So whilst I could blog, I couldn't surf. And I might have been tempted to go surfing on the water down below, but that was another reason for kind of just constantly looking at the walls inside.
That's so fascinating. So something that's just kind of struck me about tonight is the way that we've had kind of Simon on the foreshore here, looking in, Jermaine kind of collecting all of this language, like kind of gathering our heritage, like some kind of curator almost of the past as well. And then us on the Estuary trip being actually in that seascape, and you also in the forts, and then Frances with her project on the other side, and we kind of covered it all. And something that I was so interested about actually being on the estuary is seeing it as a landscape, as an actual place in itself, not just as a backdrop, you know, kind of living thing. And I just wondered if any of you had any thoughts about that. What's the difference about actually being in that space rather than looking on it or at it?
Could do.
Yes. Well, Stephen, you spent the most time there. Yes, Simon. Yeah.
I want to ask Stephen, I love the idea and what you did. I was quite fascinated about what you were doing there. But something occurred to me with you saying about the internet, kind of more historical internet. I was wondering if you started hearing voices of because there must have been a lot of trauma on there, on those things, I would have thought, with so many people being sort of stuck on these towers. And did you start, I mean, you know, they say about these like spirits that are stuck in there and stuff like that. I mean, did you start kind of hallucinating? That's what I'm saying.
This sounds like, is this still working? This sounds like a set-up question, because when I got home, my young nephew, who was about 12 at the time, said, "Oh, I saw you on the telly." And I said, "Oh yeah, how was that?" He said, "Oh, well, you know, we had the camera before you went." He said, "We were hearing all about the ghost." I said, "What ghost?" It was on the television, they were telling us about it. And as far as I could work out, it was relating to a story I told the journalist about some information I found out before, that when they put the sea forts in position, it was on shivering sands, and the sand is just soft sand, and they scuttled the sea forts onto the sand where they have to be stable, and the sands weren't. And so because of the Blitz, they brought barges full of rubble from East London and deposited it around the fort. And so the base of the fort is sort of on the mud, and on top of that is all this rubble from half of East London. And I remember telling someone that I'd read something that had happened to me. This was actually after I got back, because one morning at about 4:30, I was half asleep in that moment before you're fully awake, and when you're awake or not asleep, and it's some other world. And I heard this voice. It said, "Albert!" What the heck was that? And I know fishermen have been in the habit of pulling their boats up under the towers, which have an overhang, so that you sometimes hear fishermen talking, and I'm up in the fort and sort of looking down on them. So I went to all my spy holes, and I was looking all around the fort, around the spy hole. There was no boat there at all. And so I remember saying to someone, it must have been a spirit from the rubble.
Well, I must admit, and these lot will know this story well, but the night that we spent tied up at the end of the pier in the storm, Saffron and I were in the cabin right at the end. We couldn't sleep, either of us. And the rudder had come loose, and it was really, really banging. There was loads of noise, and the rain was lashing down. It was really scary. And they were all fast asleep. But Stephanie and I, all the way through the night, just heard these voices calling out. There were children's voices and male voices, and we didn't admit it to each other until the morning afterwards. But yes, we did hear. We did hear voices in the sea. Certainly.
Seagulls.
It was not seagulls.